Welcome to Bible Backstory. And now we're ready to pick up sort of where we left off before the virus pushed us to doing this online. What we're going to try to do in this lesson is to really understand the Jewish principles that were of the beliefs of the people into which Jesus Christ was born. Okay, we talked last time about the Shema, the daily prayer of a devout Jew, and we said that it begins with the line, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God, the Lord is one. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad." And that's as far as I'm going to try to go with the Hebrew. We're going to play a clip of it for you right now. Not the whole thing, but just enough of it so that you kind of get a sense of it. So let's listen to it.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha bechol levacha.
Okay, now you know why I don't sing. So, what is covered in the Shema is that you shall love God with all your heart, soul, and mind and body. And that the words you command you shall be on your heart. You will teach them to your children. And when you sit and walk and lie down and rise up, and you will bind them on your hands. And so what you will do is you will take small pieces of scripture, write them on a piece of paper, wrap them up, put them in a box, and wear them. These are called phylacteries. Here's a picture of kind of what they look like. Some people wear them on the head, some wear them on their shoulders, a variety of places, but devout Jews wear them somewhere. And you will also write them on the doorposts of your house and your gates. And so this is a mezuzah, and that is a little device that you will put over. Most people put it over the front door. Some people put it over the door of every room except the bathroom for some reason. But if you go to a Jewish house, you will see these. In fact, my son down in Atlanta bought a house, found one of them sitting over the front door, and didn't know what it was. And I told him we took it off. Probably maybe we shouldn't have, but we did. And there was a little piece of paper inside with Hebrew writing on it, part of the Shema as it works out. The rest of the Shema sort of repeats all of that and adds that if you do all these things, I will give you rain, I will let you gather your grain, your wine, your oil, you will live in the field, your cattle will be fine, all of these things. But lest your heart be deceived, if you turn and serve other gods, the anger of the Lord will blaze against you, and he will close the heavens, there will be no rain, and the earth will not yield any crops. But do all these things, and all good things will happen. The final part of the Shema is here. And again, if you really want to follow it, you can either Google it, frankly, or you can just freeze frame and look at the words in the Hebrew, and you'll see them here in the actual Hebrew in an Anglicized way to pronounce the Hebrew, and in a rough English translation. What is different? Here's our primary prayer as Christians, the Lord's Prayer taught to us by Jesus, and it says, it comes in several parts. It's a worship of God the Father, who should be hallowed and has a kingdom. Give us today our daily breads and forgive us our trespasses. So we ask that God provide for us. And so then the Shema has this, if you do what you are commanded to do, then good things will happen and you will get your daily bread. Deliver us from temptation, for you are powerful and to be glorified. So there's not fundamental differences between the Shema and the Lord's Prayer. Nobody said that they were supposed to be equivalent. But they are both recognition of a monotheistic, all-powerful God to whom we glorify and worship. So that's the Shema, and worth knowing about. I'm going to move you up several centuries to introduce you to somebody. This is Rabbi Moses ben Mayam, or better known as Moses Maimonides. He was born in what is modern-day Spain in 1135 AD, and I know you're going, wait a minute, how do we get that far ahead? I'm taking you up there for just a minute. Maimonides was a brilliant man. He was what I think you could probably arguably call a polymath. Not only was he a scholar and a philosopher, but he was also a doctor, a physician, and an astronomer. And he wrote what I believe is one of the coolest books in the world, The Guide to the Perplexed, trying to explain all of religion to people who really said they couldn't understand it. He is the predominant Jewish writer of the Middle Ages, and it is his work that codifies the 613 laws. Everybody agreed that there were 613 laws, but it's Maimonides is writing down 1, 2, 3, well, you can guess the top 10, but all the way down to 613. He numbered them, and that's pretty much how everybody agrees to it from here on out. He also summarizes the 13 principles of Jewish faith. We'll look at that in just the next minute. But I wanted to give you the other thing about is that Rabbi Moses ben Maimon is abbreviated R-A-M-B-A-M. So if you ever hear somebody refer to Rambam, this is the guy. Some of his quotes. The risk of a wrong decision is preferable to the terror of indecision. Love that. Anticipate charity by preventing poverty. And the last one, give a man a fish and you feed him today. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. And I know that you, like me, probably thought that was a modern expression, but it dates back to Maimonides. What did Maimonides write about the Jewish faith? Well, these are the 13 principles that he lays down. I believe with perfect faith that the Creator, blessed be His name, is the Creator and guide of everything that has been created. He alone made, does make, and will make all things. 2, I believe with perfect faith that the Creator, blessed be His name, is one. And there is no unity in any manner like His, and that He alone is our God who was, is, and will be. We'll contrast that with some of our beliefs in a minute. I believe in perfect faith in the Creator, blessed be His name, has no body, and He is free from all the properties of matter, and there can be no physical comparison to Him whatsoever. I believe in perfect faith that the Creator, blessed be His name, is the first and the last. I believe in perfect faith that the Creator, blessed be His name, and to Him alone it is right to pray, and it is not right to pray to anything beside Him. I believe in perfect faith that all the words of the prophets are true. 7, I believe that perfect faith that the prophecy of Moses, our teacher, peace be upon him, was true, and that he was the chief of the prophets, who both those who preceded him and those who followed him. I believe in perfect faith that the entire Torah that is now in our possession, the law, is the same that was given to Moses, our teacher, peace be upon him. I believe with perfect faith that this Torah will not be exchanged, that it will never be any other Torah from the Creator, blessed be His name. I believe in perfect faith that the Creator, blessed be His name, knows all the deeds of human beings and all their thoughts, as it is written in Psalm 33, who fashioned the hearts of them all, who comprehends all their actions. Number 11, I believe in perfect faith that the Creator, blessed be His name, rewards those who keep His commandments and punishes those that transgress them. 12, I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah. And even though He may tarry, nonetheless, I wait every day for His coming. And 13, I believe with perfect faith that there will be a revival of the dead at the time when it shall please the Creator, blessed be His name, and His mention shall be exalted forever and ever. Okay, that's the principle. I don't want to call it a creed, because it's not. It's a statement of faith, but not exactly a creed in the way that we look at ourselves in the Apostles' Creed or any of the other creeds that we hold dear. So let's look, okay? The existence of God. Do Christians accept the... Now remember, Maimonides is writing this in the 1100s, 1200s AD. Christianity certainly exists and is, in fact, a fairly strong religion by that point in time. Existence of God, Christians would certainly agree. The unity and indivisibility into elements, I believe scholars would argue that Maimonides wrote this to lay out that Judaism does not accept Christianity's belief in a triune God. The concept of a triune God, which we will cover later in a subsequent lesson, was not seen by the Jews as an acceptable partitioning of God, nor does the Islamic faith accept our concept of a triune God. One God cannot be divided is the Jewish belief. And that's what Maimonides is writing in the second tenet. Spirituality and incorporeality, I think we're okay on that. God's eternity, that he should be alone the object of worship. Again, I think we're okay on all those. Revelation through the prophets, preeminence of Moses among the prophets. I don't think we worry about that much. We kind of look at what the story of Moses and how Moses recounts the law given to him as part of the story, but maybe not in prominence as much as the Jews do. That the entire Torah is divine, given in origin, and dictated to Moses by God on Mount Sinai. And we talked in the last lesson about how that was an oral tradition and carried around word to word to word until it was finally written down and codified during the Babylonian exile and the years after. But we, as Jews, the answer is we believe in the Torah and that the way it was given by God to Moses is how we have it now, and there won't be another one. There will always, it's permanent and it will never be changed. That God is aware of all human actions and thoughts. We can go back to our argument about free will, and we can say, how did God create us? Did he create us as human beings with the ability to make decisions, or did he build us as little automatons? Well, I think most of you are probably over here with the concept that he built us with free will. Now, take your pick on this, and I'm not going to pretend to argue any of these points, but if we're not automatons and we have free will, do we have the ability to do as we please? Or does a powerful God either control or oversee or pre-know what it is we will do? Or do we have the ability to do what we want to do, but God knows us so well that he knows what we're going to do anyway? And he's kind of like the ultimate predictor. He'll know exactly how the game's going to play out because he knows all the players and he knows how they'll play. Take your pick here, but Maimonides argues that God is totally aware of all human actions and human thoughts and knows them ahead of time. Reward for righteousness, punishment of evil. I think most of us probably ready to sign up for that. Our next argument, of course, comes in this question of Messiah. Maimonides writes, I believe in a Messiah, and though he may tarry, I believe that he'll eventually come, and pray for that every day, which imply that he doesn't believe that he's come yet. And he's writing this in 1100 and something AD, so that is clearly a refutation of Jesus being Messiah, the Jewish Messiah. And we will go into what does it mean, what is the concept of Jewish Messiahs at the time of Christ. We will go into all that in the next lesson. And the resurrection of the dead. Some Jewish sects didn't believe in resurrection, some did. We'll look. Sadducees didn't, Pharisees did. We'll examine all of those in the next lesson or two as we go through that. Okay, let me hit a couple of other things real quick. Let's go back to the timeline now, and we're going to walk our way down to the bottom of the timeline and get ourselves right nudge up to the time where Christ will be born. So we're starting in about 300 BC, and we're going to run all the rest of the way down through history. So set your clocks back now to starting about 850 And the Assyrians are ruling from Nineveh. This is a general area of their influence. Starts when Sargon, for us in our story, starts when Sargon conquers the northern 10 tribes that are in the area of Samaria, which is this area right here. The northern tribes are intermarried and essentially lost. The tribes of Judah and Benjamin remain intact, as does Jerusalem. Jerusalem's a walled city way up on a hill, so it was really hard for the Assyrians to conquer it. They tried, they didn't really succeed. The Assyrians then are conquered by the Babylonians. Nebuchadnezzar is the leader, and Nebuchadnezzar eventually does sack Jerusalem, destroys the temple, hauls the ark to who knows where. God knows where, I suppose. The best and brightest of the Judeans are taken to Babylon, some flee to Egypt, the rest are left to sit in ruins. The Babylonians, as you can see, don't rule for a very long period of time. It's only about, 75 years or so. And then they are conquered by the Persians. Cyrus the king is the first king of Persia, and they conquer the Babylonians and tell all the people of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, the Judeans, because that area is known now as Judea. They say, go back and restart yourselves, rule yourself, establish a new temple, and restore your religious and worship means. This really leads to, and we color it in green, and again I want to mention that these graphics are from the Divine Drama course by Dr. Harry Wendt, with graphics by Australian artist Canary Baird, and we appreciate the graphics here. So this Persian province of Judah, it is a vassal or subordinate kingdom to the Persians, but it does have self-rule. And so for at least the time around, here's the Star of David, that's where Jerusalem is, they have some sense of self-rule. And that survives until the Greeks come along. Under Alexander the Great, the Greeks conquer the Persians and much else. As you can see, they conquer pretty much everything of the Nile, the Tigris and the Euphrates, much further even to the east, and much of the area around Greece and Turkey today. The death of Alexander kind of fractures the kingdom, and so this area in here is initially ruled by the people who are also ruling here, the Ptolemies, and they will be the people who will rule over the area of Jerusalem. By and large, Jewish rites of worship are maintained, but Jewish life gets inculcated with Greek culture because they are all living in a Greek world. Some of the things that are representative of a Greek world and society start getting folded into the way things are done even in Jerusalem. So even as the Greeks are ruling, there's really two parts. And once Alexander dies, then you get this. The northern area is being ruled from Antioch by the Seleucids. The southern area is being ruled from Alexandria in Egypt by the Ptolemies. And during the period of the Syrian wars, there are 7 of them, Judea goes back and forth from belonging to the Ptolemies to the Seleucids, and back and forth and back and forth. It ends up with an odd number, obviously. So eventually the Seleucids wind up running Judea. And they are still allowed to have some sense of their own religion, less control, more of the Greek philosophy and ways of living being brought in up until the time of the Seleucid king Antiochus IV, who will decide, we'll talk about in a minute, to quash the Jewish religion entirely. I will just tell you right now, though, just for the sake of working through the maps, that there'll be an uprising, starting with the Maccabean family, that will rebel against the Greek Seleucid Empire, and they'll win, and they'll restore some measure of independence to the area around Jerusalem. In fact, they'll expand some more. They'll come down here into Idumea, which is, so this is Judea, and this area down here is Idumea. Eventually it'll go up into the area where the Samaritans are as well. And this Maccabean family will then lead to the Hasmonean dynasty, which lives and rules as an independent land. And that's why this is in green instead of in orange. This is an independent land, and they rule for about 100 years, as you can see right here. And they obviously have full worship rights, and they kind of expand their boundaries, and that's how they pick up the Idumeans and some of the other people. And they are essentially converted to Judaism and brought under the law. But in 63 BC, the Roman Empire decides to expand, and boy, you can see the influence of the Roman Empire and the ability to move exert naval force, because they've essentially taken care of everything that touches the Mediterranean. After some level of infighting from 63 to about 37 BC, the Romans finally decide to take an Idumean king named Herod and install him as a vassal of Rome. So he is the king of Idumea in Judea, but he is completely under the power of Rome and has to remember that he has to maintain the peace of Rome and send money to Rome. Herod, because he's Idumean, has been converted to Judaism, but he then begins a major emphasis to make proper Jewish worship and to build that Temple Mount, where we left it with Ezra and Nehemiah at the end of the Old Testament. He's going to build this into a major cultural and civic center. He's going to exceedingly large temple area, and it will become not only the place for Jewish worship, but for commerce for all of Jerusalem and of the area of Judea, which we will look at more in the next lesson. Okay, so now that gets us, this is the way things are, Roman rule with a local king, King Herod. That takes us right up to about the time of the birth of Christ. Just to recap, these are the times when the Jewish people ran their own area. During the rules of King Saul, King David, King Solomon. Shortly after Solomon, when the northern tribes leave, we have just the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. Then that goes away with the conquering by the Babylonians. Doesn't come back until King Cyrus of Persia sends them and lets them reestablish it. That then ends when the Greeks take over. After they overthrow the Greek king Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth, they get back their land for a while until the Greeks come in. Okay, let's talk briefly about the influence of Greek culture into Judea. The belief, of course, was that Hellenization, the Greek way of life, Greek culture, was superior to anything in these other lands that they conquered. And so cities were reformed to Greek life. Language, scholarship. Remember I said the Septuagint was written down in Egypt. It was written in Greek. Names are different. Hebrew names kind of fall out of favor and they start having Greek formed names. And sport life. But the second temple was still the place where Yahweh, the one God, could be worshipped, as long as the shekels kept coming in. And the shekels had Greek lettering on them, but as long as the money came in, the Greeks were quite happy to let them have their own religion. In fact, Philo of Alexandria holds up the Jewish faith as a venerable antiquity, that even though it's monotheistic, probably enriches Greek culture and philosophy. Greeks didn't believe in one God, but they found those who did, these Jews, interesting and worth knowing about, worth studying. Synagogues wind up being built all across northern Africa and southern Europe in the areas where the Greeks ruled. And Hellenism leads to a greater emphasis on the worship in the temple and the growth of the power of the people running the temple, who are the priests and the other Jewish elites. They will become, and we'll look at this next lesson, the Sadducees. You've heard of them. But it doesn't all go well, right? After Alexander dies, the land splits in half. And so the Ptolemies and the Seleucid empires battle each other. And in 17 years, there are 7 wars, and everything winds up eventually under the Seleucids. The schism between the Syrian and Egyptian influence is reflected in the alignment of the Jewish leaders as well. Some of the Jewish leaders have to align, they align with the folks in Antioch, the Seleucids. Some align with the Egyptians. These wars continue, although Judea doesn't change hands anymore. And then when Antiochus the fourth, better known as Antiochus Epiphanes, attempts to invade Egypt, the Roman Republic joins with the Egyptians and basically suppress. They don't completely overthrow Epiphanes, but they weaken him. For some reason, he takes his anger out on the Jews. This is known as the Great Desolation. Antiochus Epiphanes IV decides to take his anger out. He establishes a heavy tax. He needs to because he doesn't have a whole lot of land that he's really controlling, and because the Romans are slowly eating away at his boundaries, and so he puts a heavy tax on the Jews in Jerusalem and gets them to help keep his empire afloat. He makes possession of all Jewish writings or observation of Jewish holidays punishable by death. So we ask ourselves, why don't we have Torah that exists back before this time? And the answer is because having it in Jerusalem was punishable by death. Now we'll see that some things survive elsewhere in Egypt, but mostly they're in Greek, or some of them get buried somewhere around the Dead Sea. We will come to all of that later. He puts Zeus up on the Temple Mount and has pigs sacrificed in the temple on the altar in the second temple, which he knows, because pigs are not kosher, not allowed to be sacrificed on the holy temple. He knows this is going to be massively offensive, on top of the fact that he's put a second god in the temple to the one God. Then he sacks the inner sanctum on the Temple Mount, and he takes all the holy items, including the table of showbread, the altar of incense, and the the menorah, the 7-candle thing, and its holy olive oil. He takes all of that away. A priestly family of Mattathias, who will become known as the Maccabean family, they lead a revolt against the Seleucid rule. Well, the Seleucids are pretty weak to begin with, and if you cut off the money that's coming out of Jerusalem, they're even weaker. And so there's not really a definitive battle here, and eventually the Antiochus throws his hands up and says, I can't deal with you people. Have it your way. You're your own people again. So they restore the temple, they cleanse it, and consecrate it by burning the candles in the menorah for 8 days, even though they only had enough oil for one. Miraculously, it burns for all 8 days, and they're allowed. That is then symbolic of the consecration and cleansing of the temple. Most of you are probably already aware that that is celebrated in the holiday of Hanukkah. The Hanukkah story is about the restoration of the temple after the Great Desolation. Okay. So what happens is now we have this Maccabean rule, and that will last until the Romans come in. The Romans will then establish a Idumean king named Herod, and he will rule right up until the time where Jesus Christ comes into the story. So we'll pick up with the rise of King Herod and the hope of a Messiah. What were the messianic expectations of the people at the time when Christ comes to birth? See you next time.